Hey everybody, Matt Brown here, and welcome to my second Q&A session. So, thanks a lot for sending in your questions, and if you have more questions that you'd like to ask for next time, just send them on in. Post them on any video and I'll get to them. So the first thing I'm going to explain, a lot of you have been asking how my Patreon membership works, so I'll explain that. You'll pay $5 a month, and then you'll have unlimited access to my transcription library. Now, the thing that's kind of a bummer for both you and me is that since I've probably transcribed thousands of songs at this point, I don't have a way for you to just go to my website, click on a button, and download the tabs for that song. So you'll unfortunately have to email me for each song that you want to see. Also with this, people have been asking, can I just have every Nirvana song? And it takes so long for me to put all of that together. So if you do sign up for the Patreon, please just ask for a song or two at a time, something like that, and I'll be able to get you all of the songs quicker that way. So that's how the Patreon works. I have to email you the tabs. So I will be setting up in the future, hopefully, a system where you'll have password access for Patreon patrons, and then you can just enter your password and download whatever you want. But not yet, unfortunately. Okay, so our first big question here comes from Garfield Cart, and Garfield Cart says, "Hey Matt, I love your videos. You taught me how to play all Nirvana songs, and I would like to know who is your favorite drummer from the band? Chad Channing, Dave Grohl, Aaron Burkhardt, Dan Peters, or Dave Foster?" Personally, I'd have to say probably Chad Channing, and I guess my reason being is it kind of has like a heavier sound. There's some decent amount of double kick stuff that you'll hear in his playing. It's kind of like the lines that he came up with a little bit better. Of course, the classic Bleach drum fills, is Chad Channing's ideas. So I think he was just a really creative and great drummer, and was kind of sad that he was, no longer a part of the band moving forward. Dave Grohl's drumming is amazing. On the Nevermind and In Utero albums, and all the tours going forward. I mean, he was a great part of the band, but my personal favorite would be Chad Channing. So, all right, Light Rose says, "Okay, what is your favorite band?" Okay, there's a lot of questions here, so I'll answer them in order. My favorite band is Jane's Addiction. So probably a surprise to a lot of you, Nirvana is not my favorite band. Do you like the Fender Mustang? I've actually never played one. Should I buy a Harley Benton Mustang? I have no idea. What do you think about Kurt Cobain's parents divorcing? I don't really know all that much about it, honestly. I remember his father, if I remember correctly, was, kind of an alcoholic and maybe a little neglectful, if that's a word. So, I really don't really know much, if anything, about his parents' personal life. Okay, the next question he asks, or she asks is, what do you think about Kurt himself? I thought he was a great guy. A very morally sound individual, I would say. Always fought the good fight and was, seemingly on the right side of just about every issue, especially really taboo topics at the time. Looking back to the early 90s with, gay rights, civil rights, all kinds of things. Things that are still, widely debated and discussed today, but he always came out, at least in my opinion, on the right side of all of those issues. So I thought he was a very, a great guy. Never met him, but obviously a very tortured kind of soul. Struggled with depression growing up. Didn't exactly have a great childhood. His heroin use obviously compounded problems for him with the fame that he was experiencing. And people think about suicide as a moral question, and I think, he was this guy that was really suffering, and so that's not something I hold against him. I guess is a question that people often ask. Okay, what is your favorite song from With the Lights Out? So I'm guessing, probably one of the more rare songs. So I'd have to probably say Anorexis. And I can never say it. I think I said this in the lesson too. Or Exorcist. Just that chorus is just so heavy. One of the heaviest riffs ever written. So I'll go with that one for my favorite. Can you teach Blandest? I'm pretty sure I already did. Why do I not like Dave Grohl? I think the reason why I don't like Dave Grohl is he makes statements that he thinks will represent most of the musicians out there, but don't. The way I describe it is, it almost seems like Dave Grohl thinks he's like the unofficial like union president for professional rock and roll musicians, and what he says represents all of us. And I take objection and offense to a lot of statements he's made publicly, specifically about learning how to play an instrument. Like he's always saying, don't take lessons. You can get great without taking lessons and stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, it is possible, but come on, give me a break. Especially somebody that makes my living as a music teacher. That always pisses me off. So I could talk for hours about why I don't like Dave Grohl, but suffice it to say, that's my answer. Any guitar bass tips for beginners? Yeah, if you can afford it, take lessons. That's my biggest piece of advice. That's going to be the fastest way to improve. And I describe it as, it's like if you're running through a jungle or something like that. It's possible that you might make it out of that jungle, but you're going to take a lot of wrong turns. You're probably going to fall in some holes. You might get bitten by a snake. And so it's just like having a guide that will say, like, turn left, turn right, do this, do that, to reach your personal goals the quickest. So that's my number one piece of advice is, if possible, take private lessons. And take private lessons with somebody qualified, because I would say, geez, any idiot that has a website can say, hey, I'm a guitar teacher. And there's so many guitar teachers out there that are in no way qualified to teach guitar or music at all. So be cautious of that. And then my other piece of advice is play as much as you can. And interesting story, the jazz guitarist Pat Metheny, I met him, Jesus, a long time ago now, probably a decade ago at least. I asked, or a friend of mine, I can't remember, it was actually me that asked, a similar question, what kind of advice do you give to a musician to improve, get better, be successful, all of that? And his answer was, always be the worst person in your band. And what he meant by that was always try to play with other musicians that are better than you, because you're going to be held accountable to them, and it's going to force you to catch up to their level. So I've always thought that was a pretty profound statement. Okay, so any tips for starting a band? Yes, another great question. And I suggest, if you haven't already, reading all of Jay Younger from White Zombie's Guitar World columns from the 90s. I'm sure you can look them up on, just Google that stuff. And he talks about specifically this, like how to start a band, how to network with other people, and how to be successful. But my number one tip is to lay down ground rules. Day one, especially, if you're working with your friends. I can't tell you how many friendships I've lost due to not doing this at the get-go. So, establish who owns the rights to the name of the band, who, legally is in charge of this band. And that usually comes into play if somebody gets fired or somebody quits. So if somebody quits, you don't want to have to, break up your band and all that work is down the drain, So hopefully get into a situation where you're not a replaceable member. I can never be replaced in my band because I write all the songs. I'm the singer and the guitarist, so it's like, if other people quit, I'm still good. I just hire other people and I keep going. So I think that in and of itself is been kind of the key to my success and I guess the longevity so far of my band and what little success we've had. So, all right, great questions. Thanks a lot for that. All right, Anthony Munoz. I really hope you do some Wipers because no one really knows how Greg Sage plays the songs. I've been dying to learn Doomtown. I tried by ear, but I'm not that good by ear. With the Wipers, I'd probably have to do a GoFundMe, or you'd have to commission me since I've not transcribed any of their songs at this point. And this kind of goes for all songs in general. If it's not something I've transcribed at this point, I just don't have time to do it for free. So, if you're interested, hit me up for that. Or if enough people say it's popular enough, maybe I'll do a GoFundMe or a Kickstarter and we'll do it that way. So, okay, this is from Wadey. It says, are you a fan of video games? And if so, which do you like most? All right, so Yes, I am. So, video games, movies, slash, television and reading are like my three big things. Also spending time with my animals, which you kind of asked about too, but I've been a huge fan of Nintendo. I've never owned another system, so I'm exclusively a Nintendo person. Right now, I'm pretty much just catching up on all the Wii U games that I haven't played, and I just finished Shovel Knight. If any of you have played that one, it's awesome. It's like a retro throwback kind of game. So yeah, I'm kind of into like the old school classic Nintendo titles like Zelda, Mario Kart, the Mario games, that kind of thing. So, do I have pets? Yes, I do, and one of them is actually sitting down here off camera. His name is Frodo. He is the dog that you might see in some of the lessons. I have two cats too. Omar, who is named after Michael K. Williams' character from The Wire. And if you've never seen that show, that's your homework for today is to watch all of that show because it's amazing. And then Chasey is my youngest cat. She's or the oldest, sorry. She's 13, so she's getting up there. She's the all-black cat you might have seen. Next question from Wadey is, have you always lived in Chicago, and how is it over there? So I was born in Cambridge, England. Lived there for 2 years. My dad got a job over in England, so then we moved back to the States. I'm originally from the Dayton, Ohio area. Lived in Beaver Creek, Ohio most of my life. And went to school in Columbus, Ohio, and then moved to Chicago after graduating school. So I've been here about 10 years and love it. It's a really good city for me to be in as a musician. The people here, you've got a really diverse and cool kind of scene of people. It's got a big city feel, but it's not like, maybe not like New York where everybody's kind of pushy and, in a hurry. People are much friendlier here and that kind of thing. Okay, another question from Wadey. Will we ever see an Alaska by Eyes Adrift tutorial? That's one I haven't transcribed, so that you'd have to commission me, or we'd have to do a Kickstarter/GoFundMe for that one. Okay, question from Langle Jamal. Why is In Utero my favorite album? I think it's the album that best represents that band. That and Bleach. When I think of the sound of Nirvana, I think of those two albums, just like raw, angry, ugly, dark music. So not Nevermind, I guess. Nevermind was kind of more poppy and a polished kind of sound, more accessible. So I also like Steve Albini's engineering work on In Utero. I think it's amazing. The way he got the drums that sound are so big and so heavy. Everything has its own space in the mix. And yeah, I love his work. So best songs too, I think. All right. Okay, Forever Infamous has a question that says, I know this is probably a touchy subject for a lot of people, but I'd love to hear your opinion on Kurt's death. Do you think he actually killed himself, or do you believe conspiracies? Yes, I believe he definitely killed himself, mainly because he had tried once before already. And, you have to think about, who would have any motivation to kill him, no one. The only person that would have any motivation would be like Courtney for a life insurance policy or something like that. And I think the same thing with her and Kurt happened with John Lennon and Yoko Ono. It's like the exact same situation. The Beatles were going through a turbulent period, so people blamed the breakup of the Beatles on John Lennon's big hot and heavy relationship with Yoko Ono, and it's like, she had nothing to do with it. The Beatles were breaking up and people wanted somebody to blame for it other than the Beatles, because the Beatles are their heroes, right? Same thing with Nirvana happened. So like Nevermind came out, that pretty much like turned Kurt Cobain into like a cultural celebrated icon. And then, people were real pissed off that Nirvana, wasn't touring endlessly when Nevermind came out. Which, and everybody blamed on this woman, Courtney, that they kept seeing more and more of and hearing more about, and it's so silly because the reality is Kurt didn't want to tour that much. It was his decision, and they're blaming Courtney for something that was his choice. So I'm always a Courtney defender. I think she's a very intelligent lady. Sure, she's had her struggles, but she's awesome. She's written some awesome music, so I think she doesn't get enough credit and respect. So hopefully that answers your question. Fabio Cushera, what are your tips on starting a band? So somebody already asked the same question earlier of Fabio. I gave a pretty long answer. Let's see who that was. It was Light Rose. So check out Light Rose, or my response to Light Rose question there, and you'll get my answer. Okay, the next question is, this is going to be hard to pronounce. Ertugrul Kiligoglu. Sorry, I'm sure I butchered that. Sorry about that. But the question is, which musician's deaths made me the most sad? You guys are getting real heavy today. So I'd have to say probably Chris Cornell. Recently anyway, just because it was so surprising, and I think to a lot of you too, that was a real shock. I mean, yes, he was depressed a lot of his life, and I remember him being, struggling with drinking issues for probably a good solid decade at least. But I don't know, he always, and this might just be a false impression that I had of him, but he always seemed like he had things under control, like he was a guy that, yeah, he had his issues, but, he wasn't like spiraling out of control or anything. So that one really shocked me a lot. Scott Weiland, his death, I mean, he always struggled with drug problems, so I can't say it was too surprising, but he's one of my favorite singers of all time, so that one really hit me. At least people like David Bowie and Tom Petty at least live pretty full lives, so I mean, as sad as those deaths were, I mean, I can't say it affected me quite as much as some of the younger guys like Prince, Kurt Cobain when that happened. I was probably only, 11, 12 years old at the time. So, yeah, heavy stuff. Of course, Dolores from the Cranberries, Too Lately, was really heavy too. Yeah, just really sad. So the next question, I forgot to copy down who asked this. So it's a question about gear and equipment. So it says, I would really like to see a guide on equipment. I actually already did one. I called it choosing the best guitar gear for you or something like that. So check that out. So affordable rig ideas for venues. I think the Black Star tube amp, the little orange, small Terror amps. Who else makes another affordable tube amp? It's Bugera or Brugera. So, for those cheaper tube amps, that's what I'd go with. And then probably, if I were looking for a budget guitar, I'd probably get like an Epiphone Les Paul. As far as speakers go, I use Mesa Boogie speaker cabinets, the Rectifier 2x12. It's expensive. So what I'd recommend for you is to get a 1x12 combo and don't get a head with a separate speaker, because you'll end up spending more money that way. And yeah, that's my advice. Cables, I run with Monster cables because they have a lifetime warranty and you can replace them. And if you play guitar over the years, my experience, crappy cables go bad maybe like every 6 months to a year. So you're better off making the investment if you're serious about guitar to get good cables. All right. Next question, Camilo Ardiles asks, can we expect more Smashing Pumpkins lessons anytime soon? Probably in a couple of months. What I'm going to do is I'm going to knock out, hopefully, 2 Kickstarter lessons on, or GoFundMe, whichever it ends up being on, Aero Zeppelin and Hairspray Queen by Nirvana. And I'm going to do a few of their bass lessons as well, which will also be Kickstarter, GoFundMe type campaigns. And then I'll be getting back to the albums that I'm working on finishing up. So Melancholy, Ritual de lo Habitual by Jane's Addiction, Soundgarden Super Unknown, and Metallica's Black Album. Alright, so Mon says, full walkthrough of amp cables and settings to get your sound. So yeah, this is kind of something I already did. And I'm actually pretty opposed to saying what my settings are. I guess for no other reason because it's pointless. And what I mean by that is I had experience of playing through, it wasn't actually his rig, but the exact same gear that Jerry Cantrell plays through. So I was plugged into a Marshall Plexi with his GNL signature model with the Seymour Duncan JB in it. Basically his tone. Sometimes he daisy chains a Bogner in there too, but I was trying to emulate his settings too, and just because of the way I play, it sounded nothing like Jerry Cantrell. Yeah, sure, I have kind of a similar style, I guess, but even if I were to mimic his settings with the exact same gear, it's still not going to sound like Jerry Cantrell. So your hands in the way you play is at least 50, if not 60% of your tone. So, my advice is to check out that video of the gear that I use and maybe go from there. But don't even emulate or buy the gear that I have. Just, try out stuff on your own and see what works best for you. So Carlos Contreras asks, what is your favorite songs from Bleach, Nevermind, in Utero? My favorite song from Bleach would have to be Paper Cuts. From Nevermind, I'm going to go with Drain You, In Utero, Francis Farmer, and do I like the Foo Fighters? No. Alright, next question. This is from Poopy John. What are my top albums? My favorite album of all time is Nine Inch Nails' The Downward Spiral. That's easily my favorite one. I have a harder time answering what my favorite band is, but that's definitely my favorite album. In Utero is my favorite Nirvana album. Jane's Addiction is my favorite band, and Ritual de lo Habitual is my favorite album by them. So those would be some of my top albums. And Poopy John says, mine would have to be Bleach, the Blue Album, Weezer, and Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness. Awesome choices. Yeah, those are also my favorites. Blue Album's awesome. Melancholy's awesome too. Just brilliant. There are some songs that I skip over every time, but for the most part, awesome. Okay, Apollo Rillet, I'm guessing. Hey Matt, how are you going to do Spank Through anytime soon? Eager to learn it. I'm eager to learn it too. This one I'm going to have to do a Kickstarter or GoFundMe for, but it's going to be really cheap. Just to, transcribe the solo, since I've never transcribed that before. So that, hopefully will happen maybe this year, but maybe not. I guess, it kind of depends on if I get to or not. Okay, Dylan Bradshaw's got a question. It says, my question is, how do you yourself go about learning a song before making a video lesson on it? This is an awesome question. So, a really, really super important question, too. So, in the world of transcribing, honestly, there are probably only about 10 people that do this for a living whose transcriptions I consistently trust. Probably the guy that I've learned the most from in the transcribing department is Andy Aladort. And he does a lot of work for Guitar World. He did the Smashing Pumpkins book with one of my former co-workers, a guy named Hemi. They put this book together with Billy Corgan's notes. So if I have a transcription and it's done by somebody good, and maybe I can post a few other people. Jimmy Brown usually does a pretty good job. Dennis Hodges, he was a co-worker of mine that I worked with at Jamplay that I've known since college, does great work. So if I don't have a transcription from one of these people, I always just transcribe it myself. And if you look at the reason why I did this YouTube channel to start with was private guitar students kept bringing in the Nirvana books for Nevermind and Bleach, and they're awful. And these are from major publications. These are Hal Leonard publications, and they're not even close to being correct. I noticed the same thing with so many Guitar World transcriptions. And let's not even get started with what's on Ultimate Guitar. That's totally all over the place. The same thing goes for professional websites too, like GuitarInstructor.com, for example. Jamplay.com, what's the other one? Guitar Tricks. The quality of the work is all over the place. So, I always do it by ear or, from a reliable transcription. So, also, what music theory do you think is important for guitarists to learn for someone interested in songwriting? Everything you can possibly learn about music theory. Everything there is to know is only going to help you. There's people out there that say, oh, music theory is going to hurt your creativity, and that's a load of BS. I've never heard a more untrue statement that has angered me more. What music theory teaches you is options that have worked in the past. So music theory comes after practice. So in other words, Bach wrote all these amazing pieces, right? And then music theory people came in and said, okay, maybe this is why these cool sounds work. So, I could do the same thing and have done the same thing with a lot of these like atonal kind of Nirvana songs, explaining why it works. So, study the songs of your favorite artists and say, okay, what's going on here? Why are this chord to that chord work, or why does this key change work? And start making those kinds of observations. But, also learn as much as you can from good resources. Like, I like the Berkeley series of books for theory. There's a lot of good textbooks that college use, like Harmony and Context. There's one by jazz pianist Shelley Berg, who's amazing. It's called The Gold Note Method. It's a jazz-based book, but it's amazing. So, maybe check out some of those books too. Okay, Kurt Novoselic Grohl asks, how did you learn to play guitar, and how old was I when I learned how to play it? So I was 11 when I started playing guitar, and I started off right off the bat taking private lessons with a guitarist named Danny Boris, who at the time was kind of known as a classical guitar virtuoso, still is to this day, and played in a real popular local band called Festive Skeletons. It was kind of like a Pearl Jam sounding rock group at the time. So I took lessons from him from the time I was 11 until I went to college. So a private lesson every single week. And then went to college and studied with 3 guitar teachers there at Capital University. And then the guy that I was studying classical guitar with actually quit after 2 years, and then Danny Boris became my teacher again for another 2 years or so. Since then, I've just been kind of learning on my own, learning from records and picking up, whatever I can. So that's how I've learned. But other than private lessons, I spent countless hours learning from transcriptions and learning by ear too, on top of what my teachers taught me. Okay, the Damnation. What would be a great tip for someone that is interested in getting the perfect pedal without much experience, and what would you suggest to them? This comes up all the time, and really the solution is to get your tone coming from your amp for the most part. If you have, it's like building a house, and the amp is the foundation. So, if you just put crap on top of a crap, or like something good, a good pedal on top of a crappy foundation, your tone's still going to be crappy. So it's starting with the good amp. There's no miracle pedal that's going to make a crappy amp sound good. That's, my number one piece of advice for you. So if you have an average amp that you want to make sound good, there are maybe some overdrive pedals that you might want to consider. Like, I use the Boss Super Overdrive, sounds great. There's the OCD full tone obsessive compulsive drive, or whatever it's called. A friend of mine, I used that for a rig when mine was down one night, and it sounded great. It was just kind of a substitute overdrive sound. So maybe check those out. I'm sure that's probably what you're asking. If not, though, hit me up and I can give you some more advice. Okay, Carlos Contreras, do you know any rock bands in Spanish? Honestly, I can't say I listen to too many bands that sing in Spanish. I remember Sublime doing a lot of that stuff, Sepultura doing some Portuguese, but it's really sad, actually. I can't say I listen to many rock bands in Spanish. Okay, Daniel Portillo, more Nirvana bass lessons, and favorite song off of each album. So I answered the favorite song off of each album before. More Nirvana bass lessons, yeah, they'll be coming later this year. Probably Kickstarters for some of them, some not, based on what I've transcribed and what I haven't. Okay, so Grunge Kid 1, here's my questions. What's your recording method when you record albums or guitar? So question number 1. So at home, I do all my demos with just a Focusrite Scarlett 2-input type deal. Record the guitar, the vocals separately. I don't even bother with recording bass. What I do is I just write bass lines, and when I notate them in Guitar Pro, once I've got the bass line written, and it sounds decent enough to export a MIDI track, then just use like some sort of MIDI sound in. I use Logic for demos, which is just like a glorified version of GarageBand. It's like $200, I think. So that's how I record demos, send them to the other guys. Our drummer lives in Bangkok, actually, Thailand. Our bass player lives in Dayton, Ohio. So I send that stuff off to those guys. They, Jake, the drummer, writes his parts, records like drums with a USB mic, sends it back, so we have, a reference of how the drums are going to sound. And then in the studio, I record at either one of two studios here in Chicago. I recorded either Rax Tracks or Electrical Audio. And for you Nirvana fans, Electrical Audio is Steve Albini's studio, who did Nirvana's In Utero and tons of other albums. I usually record out of Rax Tracks, though, which is a famous Chicago studio. Al Jorgensen is probably the most famous person that worked there. It used to be just called Trax, I believe. And they still have the old board from late 70s, early 80s, so that's what I do all of my mixing on, is actually that same board. So all the two most recent Dead Parade EPs have been recorded there, out of that studio. I work with an engineer named Andy Shoemaker. So Andy's doing all the recording while Nick, the bass player, and I track. And I track vocals separately. Then we send everything off to Jake. Jake records the drums. It comes back to Chicago from Bangkok. He records in the studio there. And then Andy and I mix the project, and then it goes off to a guy named Carl Saff, who does all of the mastering, Saff mastering. So that's how it's done. How many guitars have I owned? This is still Grunge Kid. I have owned, my first guitar was a Lotus Strat copy, and that's a terrible brand. Don't ever buy one, and buy a Squier Strat instead if that's what you're going for. Then my next guitar that I bought was a used G&L ASAT Classic, not Classic, the Special actually. And I got that used for like $450, which is absurdly cheap now that I think about it, but that was a long time ago. This is like 1995. That I traded for the Strat-looking G&L that I have, the green sparkly one. Two other guitars that I did own in the past. I had an ESP Eclipse, which is very similar to like the Les Paul shape that Kirk Hammett plays. It has a double-locking Floyd Rose with EMG pickups. So I was really a metal guitarist as a teenager, played almost exclusively metal. And then, kind of became, I guess, more of an alternative guy, I guess, kind of as I got older. I also owned an ESP Horizon at that time, which is like the Strat-shaped ESP. It's a 2-humbucker guitar. They're great guitars, way overpriced now, though, since the ESP became so successful. And then just the other guitars that you've seen in the videos, really. That's it. Okay, show your pedals and demo them quickly. That's something that you'd be better off looking at somebody that does like pedo demos and mics everything up properly and actually mixes things. So Andy from Pro Guitar Shop, check out his demos. I have a Boss Super Overdrive, Boss Digital Delay, Crybaby Wah, a Boss Phaser, Boss Auto Wah, Boss Flanger, and that is it. And an Ebo too. That's all I own pretty much. So yeah, maybe check out those pedals and demos from Andy from Pro Guitar Shop. Okay, the Game Master says, in your opinion, what are the greatest grunge bands? Top 5 or 10 if possible. So this is going to be real interesting. Nirvana is not number 1 for me. I'm going to limit this to Seattle bands because it could get crazy otherwise and too hard to think of. So just Seattle bands. Number 1 for me would be Soundgarden. Number 2, probably Nirvana. Number 3, I'd go with Alice in Chains. Number 4, I would go with Screaming Trees for sure. Number 5, I would say Temple of the Dog. Number 6, I would go with Mad Season. Number 7, I'd go with Pearl Jam. Number 8, I'd go with Mudhoney. Number 9, I'm going to say Tad. And number 10, geez, I've pretty much named all of them. We'll say Candlebox. Guilty pleasure. I think they're a real cheesy band, but they're a good band. So Candlebox will be 10. Okay, Jordy Wren says, hey Matt, I think this question is going to be very interesting for a lot of your subscribers, and of course hugely important for me, so please take your time and give the best answer you can. What are the best guitar amps you can get for getting a good Nirvana tone? If there are many brands you consider, please name them. Well, let's talk about what Kurt Cobain himself used. So he used a Nirvana preamp, a Mesa Boogie preamp in Nirvana with a Crown power amp. So the preamp is generating your tone. And the same is true of like if it's a preamp, power amp, all in one unit, which most amps are. And then the crown is just basically powering, the unit and getting the sound out there. So that's what he used live and in the studio a lot too. He also used the Fender Twin amp an awful lot. On the Nevermind album, a lot of the overdone dubs were done of the Mesa Boogie were done with Fender Bassman. Typically he used a lot of different pedals, like the Rat for distorted sounds, the Big Muff, and sometimes maybe just a straight, tone from the Mesa Boogie. So that's what he used. So if you want to, get the Kurt Cobain sound, that's what I'd recommend. All right. So, R. Bizzle, 1984. Hey Matt, I was wondering about playing guitar with your thumb high over the neck, which is how I usually play, using my thumb to meet the low E string, versus what seems like most of the best guitar players play with their thumb halfway down the neck all the time. I notice you and most advanced guitar players play that way. Is that something that I should try to do, or is it better to just play however is comfortable? So there is a right or wrong to this. So when you're playing, I guess, your basic open chords, your C, A, G, E, D, and their minor equivalents, dominant sevenths, anything that has an open string that's down by the nut, you can get away with bringing the thumb up over the fretboard when switching from one of those chords to another. Let's say, for instance, though, you're going from your basic C chord to the big F bar chord that covers all 6 strings. In that case, you want to set up the C chord in the same way that you're going to play that F bar chord. So, as you were saying, with the thumb pressed against the middle of the fretboard. And the reason being is otherwise your thumb will have to slide down the neck and adjust to get to that next chord, which is a lot of wasted movement. It's going to slow you down, ruin your rhythm, all of that. So I guess, long story short, the only times I put my thumb up is if I'm changing from one open chord to another, and then the other 2 instances when I bring the thumb up and over is, well actually there are 3 more, is for doing bends. It's better to do that if you're doing a real big wide vibrato. It's good to bring your thumb and get some wrist and forearm into it. And then the other time is if you're doing the Hendrix type chords where you're wrapping the thumb over the top of the fretboard to actually fret a note on the low E string. But every other time you do not want to do that. And you just want to play with, quote, classical guitar technique that you were describing with the thumb roughly against the the meat of the back of the neck. So, great question. Question about Aero Zeppelin again from James McDonald. That's going to be coming soon, but a Kickstarter or GoFundMe. What are my 3 favorite bands? This is Kurt Cobain's question. Favorite band would be Jane's Addiction. Number 2 favorite band of mine is Soundgarden. Number 3, I probably have to go with Aerosmith, which might shock a lot of you. Probably number 4, I'd say, is Nirvana. And beyond that, I don't know. Who knows? These days, I really like Queens of the Stone Age. I think Josh Homme is doing great stuff these days. Okay. So Maurice, any tips on learning songs by ear or ear development in general? By the way, you are the chillest guitar teacher on YouTube. Well, thanks a lot. I can't say I've checked out many other teachers. There's a guy named Fish, though. I'm not sure what his real name is, that does some cool Nirvana stuff. So if you haven't checked out Fish's channel, maybe check that out. So learning by ear, I go through a specific numbered process, and let me pull it up here. I've got it on my computer. I call it the transcribing checklist. So step 1. What is the tuning / the number of strings on the guitar being used? That's the first thing that I figure out. So what you're listening for is what sounds like an open string. So open strings ring and sound differently from fretted notes. So if you hear what sounds like an open string, but it's maybe like a G flat, that's an indication that they're maybe using an alternate tuning or tune down. So number 2 is what is the time signature. Number 3, what is the key. And then number 4, 5, or 6, these are kind of interchangeable steps. You can do them in any order. And so number 4 is figure out the basic outline of the root notes of the chord progression. The lowest note played by the guitarist, bass player, pianist, or whatever the instrumentation is. Number 5 is, determine the quality of the chord, each chord, whether it's major, minor, diminished, etc. And having a broad knowledge of chord voicings, chord formulas, the music theory, that kind of stuff really helps there. So if you know what all the major chord choices are, it's just a process of elimination to find out which one it is. For instance, if it's an add 9, major 7, major 13, 6, 9, blah, 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 blah. All right, next part. If the song part is riff-based, then, or a melody, that's, you generally want to figure it out at this point in the order. Number 6, what is the rhythm, the chord progression, riff, or melody? And then number 7, figure out the specific voicing for each chord, like where it's actually played on the guitar. And so this is the process they go through for, everything you've seen me transcribe on here. And it's worked for me. I've been doing this, professionally for, or just transcribing professionally about 10 years now, and I continue to get hired over and over again. So I must be doing something right, I guess. It looks like I forgot to write down who this was from, but it says, what was the first Nirvana song you learned how to play? It was Heart-Shaped Box. What is my favorite song to play and listen to as well? To listen to, Francis Farmer, probably to play. I really had a good time playing Sappy. That was the fun one to do. I'd never played that before I did that lesson for you guys, so that was fun. Okay, Johnny Lang says, hey Matt, what is your favorite guitar solo from a Nirvana song, and do you plan on finishing all Nirvana songs on bass? So I already talked about the bass. Yes, I will finish those. And I just kind of answered the question about the solos, probably Sappy. Okay, Alexander Craviato says, how did Kurt Cobain inspire you on YouTube? Well, as I was saying before, I kept seeing the Hal Leonard books for Nevermind and Bleach in private lessons when students would bring them in, and they're terrible. So that's why I started this YouTube channel, was to get correct information out there. Okay, Abraham Bundy. Hey Matt, love the videos. My question is, do you think there's any hope for rock music to become mainstream successful? Oh yeah, absolutely. If you look at what a lot of the youth of today listens to, it's pretty much the same stuff that I was listening to, when I was a kid, or that others my age were listening to, So sure, you've got your pop crowd and people that are young and listening to kind of that kind of stuff. Adults too, but it's mainly the younger crowd that gets into that stuff. But yeah, I see a real big emergence of people wanting to learn guitar and being interested in kind of classic, that's a relative term, but music that has proven itself to be timeless. Nirvana at this point, the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, all of that stuff, all the great bands. So I have a lot of hope for the future. Especially, I just have a lot of hope for this generation coming up now in general. As somebody that's a teacher, working with young people, this current generation is totally badass, and it makes me so mad when people give, like millennials or young people crap, because, look at everything that millennials are doing right now. Like, they're totally standing up to the man, more so than any of past generations have. So yeah, the music industry is in shambles, but there's so many great artists out there making great stuff that I am not worried about the future. In fact, I'm very hopeful that we'll see some of the best rock bands we've ever heard, in years to come. All right, so Luke Grossi says, so Matt, can you do a tutorial about Living Color? And yeah, I'm guessing this is the Cult of Personality song. So I did transcribe this professionally. So my answer was, yeah, probably at some point, but I probably won't teach the solos since I cannot play them. Vernon Reid plays faster than I do, so I can't cover his original solos. And the final question is from Peter, and Peter says, can you do a Marigold, other improv, or a Grey Goose guitar lesson? On the Marigold one, I'm guessing that's maybe some sort of like rare version of Marigold, so I probably won't do that since I already did the recorded version of Marigold. There's Omar back there in case you caught my question from earlier. Grey Goose, that's a cover of a Lead Belly song, and yeah, I do plan on doing that one, but I will be doing a GoFundMe or a Kickstarter for it since I haven't transcribed it. So that's all the questions. If you guys want me to answer your question in the next Q&A, which I'm planning on doing roughly about 6 or 8 weeks from now, so feel free to send in your questions and I will answer them on camera. So thanks a lot for watching, guys. I really appreciate it.